The evening air was thick with a sense of opulence as Charlotte Bennet stood amid the throngs of glittering chandeliers and laughter echoing off the marble walls of her parents' mansion. She surveyed the scene before her, a parade of designer-clad teenagers swaying to the rhythm of the live band, their laughter mingling with the clinking of crystal glasses. The party was a celebration of wealth, a display of status, each guest showcasing their latest designer outfits and, more importantly, their extravagant pets, tiny teacup poodles with rhinestone collars, fluffy kittens with silk leashes, and even a pair of playful ferrets that darted between the legs of the guests. Charlotte rolled her eyes at the sight, her perfectly manicured nails tapping rhythmically against her glass of sparkling water. "Can you believe this?" she muttered under her breath to her best friend Eliza, who was fussing over a particularly fluffy Maltese that had just been paraded past them. "It's like a pet fashion show in here." Eliza, lost in the sparkle of the party, barely registered Charlotte's disdain. "Oh, but look at them. They're adorable. I think I'm going to get a new puppy next week. Something small and cute. Maybe a French bulldog?" Her voice danced with excitement, but Charlotte's expression remained unimpressed. "Seriously, Eliza, you know I can't stand animals," Charlotte replied, her tone laced with irritation. "They're loud, messy, and completely unnecessary. I mean, who needs a pet when you can have the latest Louis Vuitton purse?" The words hung in the air like a challenge, and a few nearby guests turned their heads, eyebrows raised in judgment. Charlotte felt the weight of their scornful looks, a mixture of disbelief and disdain, but she held her ground. She had never been one to conform to the expectations of her peers, especially not in a city where superficiality reigned supreme. "Charlotte, you're such a snob," a voice piped up from the group, and she recognized it as coming from Mia, a girl known for her Instagram fame and her love for all things furry. "You just don't understand the joy they bring. You should really try spending time with one." Charlotte scoffed. "Joy? More like hairballs and vet bills. No thanks. I'll stick to my designer clothes and parties." Her words were met with a chorus of disapproving murmurs, and she felt a flicker of annoyance. Why couldn't they see that her perspective was valid too? As the night wore on, Charlotte excused herself from the group, feeling the need to escape the suffocating atmosphere of wealth and shallow conversation. She slipped outside, the cool breeze brushing against her skin, a welcome contrast to the heat of the crowded ballroom. Her mind was still racing with thoughts of the absurdity of it all when she decided to check her phone for messages. Distracted, she scrolled through Instagram, where the same faces from the party were plastered across her feed, each posing with their pampered pets. A moment of irritation flared up within her, and she hardly noticed the warning sign posted on the edge of the driveway. "Caution, loose gravel ahead." With her gaze fixed on her screen, Charlotte climbed into her sleek black car, the engine purring to life as she turned the ignition. She wasn't thinking about the road. She was thinking about how to dodge another round of animal talk in her next encounter with her friends. Her fingers flew over the screen, typing a quick message to Eliza about meeting up later for ice cream. Suddenly, the world around her jolted as the tires skidded on the gravel, and before she could react, the car veered off course. The loud thud of metal colliding with something solid echoed in her ears. Time seemed to freeze as she felt the impact, a violent jolt that sent her crashing against the seatbelt, and then darkness. When Charlotte regained her senses, she found herself dazed and disoriented. The car crumpled against a tree. The smell of burnt rubber and gasoline filled the air, and panic surged through her. She pushed the door open, wincing as she stumbled out onto the ground. Her heart raced as she took in her surroundings, her mind racing with confusion and shock. "Great, just great," she muttered to herself, rubbing her temples. "What a night." That's when she noticed him, a scruffy stray dog, its fur matted and dirty, standing a few feet away, tail wagging tentatively. His big brown eyes were curious, yet cautious, and for a moment, the chaos of the accident faded away. The dog approached her slowly, as if sensing her vulnerability, and Charlotte felt an inexplicable urge to push him away. "Get lost, mutt," she said sharply, her voice shaking with both shock and annoyance. But the dog didn't retreat. Instead, he took a step closer and licked her hand, his wet tongue brushing against her skin. Charlotte jerked her hand back, frustration bubbling within her. "I said go away," she exclaimed, shoving him with her foot. The dog stumbled back, but his eyes never left hers, filled with an odd mixture of concern and affection. "What do you want from me?" she huffed, her heart still racing from the accident. The encounter felt surreal, almost dreamlike, and she couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped in a bizarre twist of fate. "I don't have time for this," she added, limping away from the scene, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. As she walked, she could feel the weight of her disdain for animals pressing down on her. It was a feeling she had carried for years, stemming from a childhood incident that haunted her thoughts. But right now, all she wanted was to erase the memory of this night, to forget the dog and the accident, to return to the safety of her lavish life filled with parties and privilege. Still, as she glanced back one last time, she saw the stray dog sitting by the tree, watching her with those big, soulful eyes. A flicker of something, was it empathy, or perhaps a hint of connection, passed between them. But Charlotte shook her head, pushing the thought away. "Not a chance," she murmured, determined to dismiss the encounter as she walked away into the darkness, leaving the dog behind. Little did she know that this night, this accident, and that scruffy dog would set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself and the world around her. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Her life was about to change in ways she never anticipated. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air, mingling with the muted sounds of beeping machines and hushed voices. Charlotte lay in the hospital bed, her head spinning with a cocktail of confusion and frustration. The accident had jolted her world, but the pain in her leg was a dull throb compared to the whirlwind of emotions swirling within her. Minutes felt like hours as she stared at the ceiling, lost in her thoughts, when suddenly her parents burst into the room. "Charlotte!" her mother exclaimed, her voice a mixture of relief and panic. "Oh my God, we were so worried!" Charlotte's father, a tall man with a stern face softened by worry, rushed to her side, gripping her hand tightly. "Are you okay? Can you tell us what happened?" She shrugged, her expression sullen. "I'm fine, just a little shaken up." "It's not a big deal?" "Not a big deal?" her mother echoed, her voice rising in disbelief. "You crashed your car into a tree. You could have been seriously hurt." "I said I'm fine," Charlotte snapped, pulling her hand away. "And I don't want to talk about it." Her parents exchanged a worried glance. They had always indulged Charlotte's whims, but this was different. Their daughter was not just dismissing the accident. She was dismissing them, and they could feel the distance growing. "Charlotte, we just want to make sure you're all right. This is a lot to process," her father said gently, trying to bridge the gap between them. "I don't need you to worry about me," she shot back, her voice sharp. "I'm not some delicate flower that needs coddling." Her mother took a deep breath, visibly trying to maintain her composure. "It's not about coddling, it's about support. We want to help you through this." "Help me? By treating me like I'm some kind of victim?" Charlotte retorted, crossing her arms defiantly. "I'm not going to start crying over a stupid car accident. It's not like I hit a person." As the tension in the room thickened, Charlotte's heart raced, not from fear but from a sense of anger and rebellion. She didn't want to be vulnerable. She didn't want to confront the feelings that threatened to surface. Instead, she focused on the familiar disdain for animals that had always been her shield. "Let's just go home, okay? I really don't want to talk about this," she muttered, her tone softened only by the exhaustion that washed over her. Her parents hesitated, but the worry in their eyes was palpable. "We think it would be good for you to see a therapist," her father suggested. "Talking about this could help." "Absolutely not," she replied, her voice firm. "I'm fine. I don't need therapy." "Charlotte," her mother interjected, "it's not just about the accident. It's about everything. The way you've been shutting us out. Your feelings." Charlotte felt a wave of irritation wash over her. "My feelings? You mean my hatred for animals? You know that's not going to change just because I had a little crash," she said, her words laced with sarcasm. "Charlotte, that's not what we're trying to say," her father implored, his voice steady. "We just want you to talk to someone who can help you work through everything." "Whatever," she muttered, turning her gaze away from them, refusing to let them see the vulnerability she was trying so hard to hide. A few days later, Back in the ivory tower of her luxurious home, Charlotte found herself sitting in a plush chair across from a therapist. The room was tastefully decorated with soft colors and calming artwork, but it felt suffocating to her. The therapist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, pulled out a notepad. "Charlotte, I know you might not want to be here, but I want to help you." She began gently. "Can we talk about how you're feeling after the accident?" Charlotte sat back, crossing her arms defiantly again. "I'm fine. Nothing's wrong. I just need to get back to my normal life." "Normal life?" the therapist echoed, tilting her head slightly. "What does that look like for you?" "It looks like having nice things, going out with my friends, and not being bothered by stupid dogs," Charlotte replied, her voice dripping with disdain. "I don't see why I need to talk about my feelings when I can just focus on what's important." "Important to whom?" the therapist asked, her tone gentle yet probing. "To you or to others? It's okay to feel vulnerable, Charlotte. It's part of being human." Charlotte huffed, rolling her eyes. "I'm not vulnerable. I just don't want to waste my time on things that don't matter." "Okay," the therapist said, jotting down notes, "but everything you're saying suggests that you're feeling something deeper. Would you like to explore that?" "No," Charlotte replied curtly. "I just want to go home." As the session dragged on, Charlotte's thoughts drifted to her room, decorated with posters of celebrities and designer clothing, all symbols of her wealth and privilege. She longed for the familiar comfort of her life before the accident, the one where she was in control and nothing could touch her. That evening, Charlotte sat alone in her room, the silence enveloping her like a heavy blanket. She stared out the window, the fading light casting shadows across her walls. The world outside felt so distant, and she was trapped in her own mind. Suddenly, a soft whimper broke through the stillness, pulling her attention away from her thoughts. Curiosity piqued, she glanced outside and her heart skipped a beat. There was Max, the scruffy dog she had encountered after the accident, huddled against the cold. His fur was matted, and he looked up at her with wide, pleading eyes. Despite her instincts screaming to shut the window and ignore him, something stirred within her. She rubbed her forehead, conflicted. "Why can't I just ignore him?" she muttered to herself, but her feet had already moved toward the door, as if drawn by an invisible string. "Just for a minute," she whispered, opening the door cautiously. The chill of the evening air rushed in, and she crouched down, her heart pounding, as she extended a hand toward him. "Hey, boy. It's okay." Max approached slowly, his tail wagging feebly, and as he nuzzled her hand, Charlotte felt an unexpected wave of warmth flood through her. "What am I doing?" she thought, but she couldn't bring herself to push him away. "Come in, then," she said reluctantly, stepping aside to let him enter. Max trotted in, his wet nose brushing against her leg as he explored her room. Charlotte watched him with a mix of wonder and trepidation. "Great. Now I'm basically a dog owner," she thought, rolling her eyes at the absurdity of the situation. Yet as Max settled at her feet, a strange comfort enveloped her. This was the first time since the accident that she didn't feel entirely alone. "Maybe you're not so bad after all," she murmured to Max, who looked up at her with those big, trusting eyes. In that moment, the walls she had built around herself began to crack, and Charlotte found herself confronting emotions she had long suppressed. For the first time, she didn't want to turn away from the vulnerability that had haunted her since that day. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Charlotte Bennett found herself sitting on the plush, white carpet of her room, Max curled up beside her. It was a peculiar sight. The once pristine space, filled with designer clothes and luxury trinkets, now felt more like a sanctuary for the scruffy dog she had reluctantly allowed into her life. Max, with his matted fur and soulful brown eyes, lay there, a comforting presence that somehow made the walls of her opulent prison feel less confining. "You're really something, huh?" Charlotte muttered, scratching behind his ears. The warmth of his body against her leg was unexpectedly soothing. She had spent her life avoiding connection, wrapping herself in layers of indifference and scorn, especially towards animals. They were messy, loud, and fragile, qualities she had no patience for. But here was Max, a stray who had wandered into her life at the worst possible moment, and instead of feeling repulsed, she felt a strange pull toward him. Max lifted his head, his tail thumping softly against the floor as if he understood her words. Charlotte chuckled, the sound foreign to her own ears. "You're not supposed to be so charming, you know. I'm supposed to hate you." She shook her head as if to clear her thoughts. The internal conflict was growing. Every moment spent with Max chipped away at the walls she had so carefully constructed. Yet she couldn't fully embrace the change. Memories of her childhood trauma lurked beneath the surface, dark and menacing. The image of her family's beloved cat, Mia, whom she had watched suffer due to her own reckless behavior, haunted her. The guilt had been unbearable, and it had manifested into a deep-seated loathing for animals. How could she risk opening herself up to that kind of pain again? As if sensing her turmoil, Max nudged her hand with his nose, pulling her back to the present. Okay, she sighed, reaching for the leash hanging by the door. "Let's take a walk. Maybe some fresh air will do us both good." The streets of her neighborhood were lined with opulent mansions, each one more extravagant than the last. But as she stepped outside, the world felt different. The golden light of dusk cast long shadows and the cool breeze nipped at her skin. Max trotted beside her, tail wagging, reveling in the freedom of the open air. Charlotte watched him, his joy infectious, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of happiness. They wandered through the upscale neighborhood, the soft crunch of gravel underfoot, punctuating their silence. Charlotte glanced around, her old insecurities creeping back in as she spotted a group of her friends from the party a few nights ago. They were gathered on the sidewalk, their designer outfits immaculate, laughing and taking selfies. The contrast between their polished lives and her current state felt stark. "Look who it is," one of them, Tiffany, called out with a sneer. "Charlotte and her new pet. Didn't think you'd ever associate with a dog that doesn't cost a fortune." Charlotte's heart raced, a familiar wave of embarrassment washing over her. She felt Max shift beside her, his presence both a comfort and a reminder of her vulnerability. "Shut up, Tiffany," she retorted, trying to sound confident. "At least he's not a spoiled brat." Her friends erupted into laughter, and Charlotte's face flushed with anger and shame. She felt the urge to retreat, to hide away in her luxurious bubble, but something held her back. Max looked up at her, his eyes wide and trusting, as if he believed she could stand up for herself. Taking a deep breath, she squared her shoulders. "I'm taking care of him, and he's a lot more loyal than you guys," she shot back, surprising herself with the venom in her tone. Without waiting for their response, she turned and continued walking, Max following closely behind her. The laughter faded, but the sting of their judgment lingered. As they rounded a corner, Charlotte's heart raced not just from the confrontation, but from the realization that she was beginning to care for Max. It was a foreign feeling, one she had avoided for so long. They walked for several blocks, the tension of the encounter slowly dissipating as she focused on the rhythm of her steps and the warmth of Max's presence. Later that evening, back in her room, Charlotte sat cross-legged on her bed, a notebook resting on her lap. She had never been one to journal, but something compelled her to write down her thoughts. The pages began to fill with her feelings of confusion and fear, but also with moments of joy shared with Max. As she wrote, the memories of Mia crept in, shadowing her new experiences with doubt. "Why do you have to be so complicated?" she muttered to Max, who had taken up residence at the foot of her bed, snoring softly. "I thought I could just ignore you, but you keep worming your way in." She sighed, brushing a stray hair away from her face. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to try, just a little. The following day, Charlotte found herself sitting in the sterile office of her therapist, Dr. Larkin. The walls were painted a soothing blue, adorned with abstract art that seemed to mock her discomfort. Dr. Larkin sat across from her, a kind smile on her face, and Charlotte felt the urge to roll her eyes. "Charlotte, I know it's difficult, but I'd like to talk about your experience with Max," Dr. Larkin prompted gently. Charlotte crossed her arms, feeling defensive. "What's there to talk about? He's just a dog. I've been fine without animals my whole life." "Have you really?" Dr. Larkin's tone was soft yet probing. "You mentioned a trauma in your childhood related to a pet. Is it possible that your feelings toward Max are tied to that experience?" Charlotte swallowed hard, memories flooding back. Mia's pained cries, her parents' frantic attempts to help, and the guilt that had consumed her. I don't want to feel that way again. Animals can't be trusted. Dr. Larkin leaned forward, her expression earnest. What if you allowed yourself to see Max as an opportunity for healing rather than a reminder of your past? Sometimes, facing our fears can lead to unexpected growth. Charlotte hesitated, the walls around her heart tightening. You think he can help me? Perhaps, but it's up to you to decide if you want to try, Dr. Larkin replied, her voice steady and reassuring. It's important to confront your feelings, Charlotte. You've been avoiding them for too long. That evening, as Charlotte returned home, her thoughts swirled with uncertainty. She glanced at Max, who was wagging his tail, eager for attention. Okay, let's try this. Taking a deep breath, she knelt beside him, looking into his eyes. You want to go on an adventure, buddy? Max barked, his enthusiasm palpable. Charlotte couldn't help but smile, a genuine smile that felt foreign, yet exhilarating. They headed out, the world outside her door waiting, full of possibilities and challenges. As they walked, she began to let go of her insecurities, focusing instead on the joy that Max radiated. But as they strolled through the neighborhood, the laughter of her friends echoed in her mind. Would they mock her again? Would she be able to stand firm against their judgments? She glanced down at Max, who was oblivious to her turmoil, lost in the simple pleasure of a new scent. Maybe they're right, she whispered to herself, the words heavy with doubt. Maybe I'm just a joke. Max paused, looking up at her with those big, trusting eyes. It was as if he sensed her distress, and in that moment, Charlotte knew she had a choice to make. She could either let her fear dictate her actions or embrace the uncertainty and allow herself to change. All right, Max, she said, determination filling her voice. Let's show them we're not a joke. And with that, they continued down the street, side by side, ready to take on whatever came next. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over the Los Angeles skyline as Charlotte Bennett left the therapy office. She had reluctantly agreed to come here, still wrestling with her feelings about the accident and what it meant for her future. The sessions felt like a chore, but today had been different. She had spoken about Max, the scruffy dog who had somehow wormed his way into her heart. Charlotte, her therapist had said, her voice gentle yet firm, you have a unique opportunity with Max. He could help you confront your fears if you let him. Charlotte had nodded, feeling an unexpected warmth bloom in her chest at the thought. After their last few walks, she had started to see Max less as a nuisance and more as a companion. There was something about the way he looked at her, his big brown eyes full of understanding, that made her feel like maybe she wasn't as alone as she had once believed. As she stepped out onto the bustling street, she found herself glancing around, half expecting to see Max waiting for her. The thought brought a smile to her lips, a smile that felt foreign yet exhilarating. What's happening to me? She muttered under her breath, shaking her head. That evening, Charlotte made a decision that would surprise even herself. She rummaged through her closet, pulling out old clothes she no longer wore and setting them aside. If I'm going to do this, she thought, I might as well make it worthwhile. The next few days were a whirlwind. Charlotte found herself volunteering at the local animal shelter, a place she had once scoffed at during conversations with her friends. The first time she walked through the doors, the sounds of barking and mewing overwhelmed her senses. She hesitated, her heart racing as she considered turning back, but the thought of Max kept her feet planted firmly on the ground. Charlotte, you made it! A cheerful voice rang out. It was Lisa, the shelter manager, a woman with a kind smile and a passion for animals that was infectious. We're so glad to have you here. Yeah, I just thought I'd give it a try, Charlotte replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Lisa led her through the shelter, introducing her to various dogs and cats, each with their own story. Charlotte found herself drawn to a particularly scruffy terrier who wagged its tail furiously as she approached. This little guy is Benny, Lisa said, grinning. He's a sweetheart, but really needs a home. Charlotte knelt down, allowing Benny to nuzzle against her hand. He's cute, she admitted, a smile creeping onto her face. Over the next few weeks, Charlotte continued to volunteer regularly, and each visit chipped away at the walls she had built around herself. She learned how to clean kennels, feed the animals, and even assist people looking to adopt. The joy she found in helping these animals, in witnessing their transformations from abandoned to loved, was intoxicating. One day, while cleaning a kennel, Charlotte spotted a small puppy in the corner, trembling and alone. Her heart clenched at the sight. The puppy resembled Max, with the same scruffy fur and soulful eyes. "Hey there, little one," she said softly, kneeling down. "What's your name?" "Her name is Daisy," Lisa chimed in as she walked by. "She's new here. Just came in last week." Charlotte felt a rush of protectiveness. Why hasn't anyone adopted her yet? "Some dogs take longer to get used to their surroundings. She's shy, but we're working with her," Lisa explained. Charlotte reached her hand through the bars and Daisy sniffed it tentatively before nuzzling against her fingers. A warmth spread through Charlotte's chest. "I think she's adorable," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. As the days turned into weeks, Charlotte's bond with Max grew deeper. She began taking him to the park, where they would play fetch and stroll along the winding paths, the sun shining down on them. During these moments, Charlotte felt lighter, as if the burdens she had carried for so long were slowly dissipating. Yet as she blossomed in her new role as a volunteer, Charlotte found herself confronting a familiar challenge: her friends. They had noticed her transformation and were less than supportive. It started with casual remarks. "Charlotte, what's with all the animal stuff? You're not turning into some crazy dog lady, are you?" Her friend Tara teased one afternoon at brunch. Charlotte felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I'm just volunteering, Tara. It's not a big deal." "But come on, you used to hate animals," another friend chimed in, a hint of disbelief in her tone. "What happened to you?" Charlotte's heart sank at their words. She had hoped they would be more supportive, but instead their judgments felt like a weight on her shoulders. "People change," she said defensively, her voice firm. "Maybe you should try it sometime." The conversation turned tense, with her friends dismissing her newfound passion. "Whatever, Charlotte. Just don't forget who you really are," Tara said, rolling her eyes. As they continued to bicker, Charlotte felt the walls closing in around her. She hadn't expected to lose friends in the process of finding herself, and the thought gnawed at her. But as she sat there, she realized something important. She was finally standing up for herself, even if it meant standing alone. That weekend, Charlotte returned to the shelter, her heart heavy but determined. She found Lisa busy organizing an adoption event and offered to help. "I want to make sure Daisy finds a home," she said, her voice unwavering. "Of course! We need all the help we can get," Lisa replied, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. As the event unfolded, Charlotte poured her heart into advocating for the animals, sharing their stories and encouraging potential adopters to consider the joy and love these pets could bring into their lives. Among the crowd, she noticed a woman lingering near Daisy's kennel, her eyes filled with concern. "Do you want to meet her?" Charlotte asked, stepping forward. "I'm not sure. She looks so scared," the woman replied, her voice soft. Charlotte knelt down beside Daisy, gently coaxing her to come closer. "She just needs a little love and patience. I promise she's worth it," she said, her heart swelling with hope. The woman knelt beside her, and in that moment, Charlotte saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. As the day went on, Charlotte felt a sense of fulfillment that she had never experienced before. She wasn't just helping animals, she was changing lives, including her own. But as she returned home that evening, a familiar knot formed in her stomach when she thought of her friends. The conflict between her old life and the new one she was creating loomed over her like a dark cloud. Could she truly embrace this change and still hold on to the relationships that once defined her? The next day, Charlotte found herself back at the shelter, her heart racing as she watched Daisy being adopted. The woman who had hesitated the day before was now beaming as she held the puppy close. And for a moment, Charlotte felt a pang of longing. "Look at that smile!" Lisa exclaimed, clapping her hands together. "You did that, Charlotte! You made a difference!" Charlotte beamed, but deep down, she felt the bittersweet sting of loss. Daisy was meant to go home, and Charlotte knew that was how it should be. Yet as she turned to leave, she caught sight of Max, wagging his tail eagerly at the door, and the warmth returned. "Maybe it's time to think about what I want," she whispered to herself, stroking Max's scruffy fur as they walked out together. But as she left the shelter, her mind was filled with thoughts of the puppy she had grown attached to, and the realization that she had the power to change not just her own life, but the lives of others, began to settle in her heart. Charlotte's journey was just beginning, and she had a feeling that the next chapter would be the most important one yet. Charlotte Bennett stood in her sprawling backyard, the sun filtering through the leaves of the tall palm trees, casting dappled shadows across the manicured lawn. With Max at her side and Bella prancing nearby, she felt a strange mix of contentment and anxiety. Her parents had been uncharacteristically quiet about her recent transformation, and the weight of their pride hung in the air like an unspoken promise. Yet beneath that pride lay a creeping fear that it was all too good to be true. "Hey Max, come here, boy," she called, her voice a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The scruffy dog bounded toward her, his tail wagging furiously. Bella followed, her tiny legs moving in an adorable frenzy. Charlotte knelt down, enveloping Max in a hug, feeling the warmth of his fur against her cheek. This was a moment she never thought she would cherish. "Look at you two," she said, laughing lightly. "Who would have thought I'd become the crazy dog lady?" As she looked into their eyes, a knot formed in her stomach. What if this was just a phase? What if her parents' pride was misplaced? The thought lingered, a shadow on an otherwise bright day. "Charlotte?" Her mother's voice broke through her thoughts. She appeared at the patio door, a soft smile gracing her lips. "Can we talk for a moment?" "Sure, Mom." Charlotte stood, brushing off the grass from her jeans and walking toward her mother. They settled at the outdoor dining table, where the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the crisp morning air. "I wanted to take a moment to tell you how proud we are of you," her mother said, her eyes shining with sincerity. "You've really changed. I see you volunteering at the shelter and taking care of Max and Bella. It means so much to us." "Thanks, Mom," Charlotte replied, though a hint of uncertainty still colored her voice. I don't know. It feels like I'm trying to be someone I'm not." Her mother frowned slightly, leaning forward. "You're not pretending, sweetie. You're growing. And it's okay to be afraid sometimes. Change can be overwhelming." Charlotte nodded, but the doubt still gnawed at her. "I just hope I'm doing the right thing. What if it all falls apart?" "It won't if you keep being true to yourself," her mother reassured her, placing a comforting hand on Charlotte's. "Just take it one day at a time." "Okay," Charlotte said, though she felt the weight of her mother's words. As she sipped her coffee, she resolved to embrace the changes, if only to prove to herself that she could. Later that morning, Charlotte decided to take both dogs for a walk. The sun was shining brightly, and the neighborhood was alive with the sounds of laughter and music filtering from nearby homes. As they strolled down the street, she found herself enjoying the simple act of being outdoors, her heart lightening with each step. "Come on, you two!" she called, tugging on the leashes. Max trotted confidently beside her, while Bella's small frame made her look almost comically energetic. Suddenly, Charlotte spotted a familiar figure at the end of the street, a woman she had never met but had seen once or twice in passing. The woman's gaze locked onto her, and she approached with an air of purpose. "Charlotte Bennett?" the woman asked, her voice steady but laced with curiosity. "Yes," Charlotte replied, her heart racing as she sensed something was off. "I'm sorry to interrupt your walk, but I think we need to talk," the woman said, glancing down at Max. "I saw the accident you were in a few weeks ago." Charlotte's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" The woman took a deep breath, as if gathering her thoughts. "I witnessed the crash. I was just a few blocks away, and I noticed the dog, the one you have with you now." "Max?" Charlotte asked, feeling a strange flutter of anxiety. "Yes," the woman nodded, her expression serious. "He wasn't just a stray. He was a therapy dog for a local hospital. He was trained to comfort patients and provide emotional support." Charlotte's mind raced. "What are you saying? He was supposed to be with someone else?" The woman's eyes softened. "He was, but he got away during a transition. He's supposed to be with someone who needs him." "Wait, so you're saying that he was meant to help people?" Charlotte's voice trembled, a mix of confusion and something else. "Hope?" "Yes," the woman replied, her tone gentle. "It's possible that he was sent to you for a reason. Sometimes these things happen, and we don't understand why." Charlotte felt a rush of emotions flooding through her, a mix of gratitude and bewilderment. "But I'm not the person who needs help. I'm the one helping him. Maybe you both needed each other, the woman suggested, her voice calm. You had a traumatic experience, and he's trained to help people heal. Sometimes the universe aligns in strange ways. Charlotte looked down at Max, who seemed to sense the gravity of the conversation. He gazed up at her with those soulful eyes, and for the first time, she felt a connection beyond mere companionship. Is it possible that he was meant for me? She whispered, more to herself than to the woman. I believe so, the woman replied, her voice encouraging. And perhaps this is your chance to heal, to confront your fears and embrace the love that comes with it. A silence enveloped them as Charlotte processed the woman's words. For so long, she had been running from her feelings, her trauma, her fear of animals, her insecurities. But standing there with Max by her side and Bella bouncing around her feet, she felt a flicker of hope. Thank you, Charlotte said finally, her voice steady now. I didn't know. I had no idea. The woman smiled softly. Just remember, it's okay to lean on each other. You might both be exactly what the other needs. As the woman walked away, Charlotte took a deep breath, feeling a sense of clarity wash over her. Maybe there was more to her journey than she had realized. Maybe the bond she was forming with Max was not just about companionship, but about healing, a chance to rewrite her story. Hey, Max, she murmured, patting his head. I guess we're in this together, huh? He responded with a gentle nudge against her leg, as if affirming her newfound understanding. As they continued their walk, Charlotte felt lighter, as if the weight of her past was beginning to lift. With Bella happily trotting alongside them, they ventured further into the unknown, ready to embrace whatever came next. For the first time in a long while, Charlotte felt like she was finally on the right path, ready to face the challenges ahead with courage and an open heart. Charlotte sat cross-legged on her plush living room carpet, a sea of open books surrounding her like a fortress. The glow of the afternoon sun streamed through the sheer curtains, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air. Max lay beside her, his head resting on her lap, a few strands of fur catching the light. She absent-mindedly ran her fingers through his matted coat, still trying to process everything that had happened since their fateful meeting. The idea that Max had been a therapy dog, trained to provide comfort and healing, stirred something deep within her, a connection she had never anticipated. Isn't it funny? She mused aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. You were supposed to help someone else, and now you're stuck with me. Max lifted his head, his brown eyes sparkling, with an understanding that made Charlotte's heart swell. She chuckled softly, shaking her head. I didn't even like animals a month ago. How did you manage to wiggle your way into my life? As she pondered the mystery of Max's past, her phone buzzed incessantly on the carpet, breaking the tranquil moment. She picked it up, glancing at the screen. It was a text from one of her old friends, Sarah, who had always been a major influence in her life. Party at Jordan's this Friday. You coming? Everyone's gonna be there. Charlotte felt a twinge of nostalgia mixed with anxiety. The thought of returning to that world, filled with superficial conversations and the pressure to conform, made her stomach knot. She hesitated, typing and deleting messages as she struggled with her response. What would they think of her now? Would they even recognize her as the same girl who had once scoffed at the idea of pet ownership? But then again, she had promised herself that she would embrace the changes she was experiencing. I'll go, she finally typed, hitting send before she could second-guess herself. Max nudged her hand with his nose as if sensing her internal struggle. You think I should? What if they make fun of me again? She asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Max barked softly, his tail thumping against the carpet, and Charlotte laughed. Okay, I'll be brave. For you. As Friday approached, Charlotte found herself increasingly anxious. She dressed in a simple yet elegant outfit that reflected her newfound authenticity. Something comfortable yet stylish. Her parents had noticed her change and were supportive, but she still felt a lingering doubt about her acceptance in her old social circles. Upon arriving at Jordan's mansion, she was immediately engulfed by familiar sights and sounds. Laughter and music spilled from the open doors, mingling with the scent of gourmet appetizers wafting through the air. She stepped inside, scanning the room for friendly faces. The plushness of the surroundings felt suffocating. The glittering chandeliers and designer decor, a stark reminder of a life she was beginning to see through different eyes. "Charlotte!" Sarah squealed, rushing over with a glass of sparkling water in her hand. "You made it! We were worried you'd ghost us." "Yeah, well, I'm here," Charlotte replied, trying to sound casual. Sarah's enthusiasm was infectious, and for a moment, Charlotte felt a flicker of excitement. "Have you seen the new puppy that Jordan adopted?" Sarah continued, her eyes wide with enthusiasm. "It's a golden retriever. Adorable." Charlotte forced a smile, the mention of a puppy igniting a pang of jealousy. "I've got Max now," she replied, her voice more confident than she felt. "He's a stray, but he's pretty amazing." The smile on Sarah's face faltered for just a moment. "A stray? I thought you hated animals," she said, a hint of skepticism creeping into her tone. "I did. But things have changed," Charlotte replied, her voice steady. "Max, he's been good for me." The conversation shifted, and as the night progressed, Charlotte found herself drifting from group to group. She made small talk and laughed at jokes that felt increasingly hollow. She was no longer the girl who reveled in the luxury of superficiality. She craved deeper connections, something her old friends didn't seem to understand. Later in the evening, as she stood by the snack table, she spotted the woman from the animal shelter event. The sight of her sent a shiver down Charlotte's spine. The woman was talking animatedly with a couple of guests, but her gaze kept drifting back to Charlotte. There was an intensity in those eyes that made Charlotte uneasy. "Hey, do you know her?" Sarah asked, noticing Charlotte's distracted stare. "Not really," Charlotte replied, her heart racing. "But I think she might have some information about Max." "Information? About a dog?" Sarah laughed, but Charlotte's expression remained serious. Before she could gather her thoughts, the woman approached her, a knowing smile on her face. "Charlotte, right?" she said, her voice warm yet firm. "I hoped I would run into you again." Yes," Charlotte stammered, her pulse quickening. "You were at the animal shelter fundraiser." "Indeed," the woman replied, her demeanor shifting slightly. "I wanted to talk to you about Max." Charlotte felt her heart leap. "What do you know about him?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The woman glanced around, ensuring they weren't overheard. "I have some information about his past, his previous owner. It's important, and I think you deserve to know." "What do you mean?" Charlotte pressed, curiosity and fear battling within her. The woman took a deep breath, her expression grave. Max was trained as a therapy dog for a child who had gone through a traumatic experience. He was supposed to help that child heal, but something happened and he ended up on the streets instead. Charlotte's mind raced. "What do you mean? Who was his owner? Why would they abandon him?" The woman hesitated. "It's a long story, but I believe Max's previous owner is connected to someone you know. Someone who might have been involved in a similar accident. Something that could change how you view your own experience." Charlotte's heart sank. The weight of the woman's words settled heavily on her shoulders. "Are you saying he was meant to help me because of my accident?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The woman nodded, her eyes filled with sympathy. "You need to be careful, Charlotte. This isn't just about you and Max anymore. There are deeper ties at play here, and it's time you learned about them." As the woman walked away, Charlotte felt a whirlwind of emotions crash over her. Confusion, fear, and a flicker of excitement mixed with dread. Everything she thought she knew about Max, about her own journey of healing, was suddenly cast in a shadow of uncertainty. She stood there, grappling with the revelation, aware that she was standing at a crossroads, one that would lead her to confront not only her past, but the very essence of who she was becoming. "Max," she murmured, glancing down at her faithful companion, who was now sitting at her feet, looking up at her with unwavering loyalty. "What have we gotten ourselves into?" The night continued around her, but all Charlotte could feel was the weight of the truth hanging in the air, a truth that was about to unravel everything she thought she knew.